Please join us for the following news. Shocking, Zhang Yusha was accused of transferring nuclear information to the U.S. According to the latest report from Forbes Daily, China's highest-ranking general is suspected of transferring classified information about the country's nuclear weapons program to the U.S. The newspaper cites anonymous sources regarding a high-level briefing related to these allegations. In addition, General Zhang Yuxi, 75, is also accused of accepting bribes to perform official duties, including promoting an officer to the position of Minister of Defense. The aforementioned briefing took place before the Chinese Ministry of Defense announced on Saturday that it was investigating Zhang. According to the FW newspaper, Zhang is suspected of leaking core technical data on China's nuclear weapons to the United States and is also under investigation for allegations of factionalism and abuse of power in military decisions. These allegations, this goes beyond China's official statement, which only said they were investigating Zhang, a Politburo member and former ally of President Xi Jinping, for disciplinary and legal violations, a euphemism for corruption. Officials are also examining Zhang's supervisory role over a powerful agency responsible for military research, development, and procurement. He is accused of receiving large sums of money in exchange for promotions within the defense procurement system. General Liu Zhenli, a member of the Central Military Commission of the Communist Party of China, is also under investigation, according to a brief announcement on Saturday. The investigations have shaken the highest echelons of power in the Chinese military, expanding the largest purge of generals since the chaotic era of Mao Zedong ended in 1976. Zhang's downfall also marks the first time Xi Jinping has investigated a close ally. The fathers of both men had worked together in northwestern China during the Civil War. Zhang and Liu were among the few Chinese generals with remaining battlefield experience, having participated in border clashes with Vietnam in the late 1970s and 1980s, the most recent periods of Chinese military involvement. Liu, 61, was formerly the chief of staff of the Chinese military's Joint Staff, the agency responsible for intelligence operations and training. President Xi Jinping launched the latest anti-corruption campaign in the military in mid-2002, 3 months after winning an unprecedented third term. Since then, 2 vice chairmen of the Central Military Commission, 3 members of the Central Military Commission, a former defense minister, and at least a dozen senior generals who commanded military regions have been dismissed. A U.S. warship docked at a Cambodian naval base for the first time, approaching a Chinese vessel. A U.S. warship docked at Cambodia's Dream Naval Base on Saturday for the first time since the base was renovated by China. This move has previously caused concern in Washington, which believes that the RAM base, located off the southern coast of Cambodia, could give China a strategically important position in the Gulf of Thailand, near the disputed South China Sea. The littoral combat ship Sincity LCS-20 docked Saturday morning just 150 meters from 2 Chinese warships already anchored there. Commander Andrew James called it an honor and expressed hope for the beginning of a long tradition of cooperation. However, this could be a move that significantly worries Beijing. Cambodian leaders have repeatedly denied that Grace serves any particular power, following 2022 U.S. media reports suggesting that the new facilities, initially built in part with U.S. funding, would be exclusively for Cambodia. The Chinese Navy. Rambay said the 5-day visit by the U.S. ship was aimed at promoting cooperation and demonstrating an open and transparent policy. The base was inaugurated last April with the attendance of Prime Minister Hamanet and a delegation from the People's Liberation Army of China. Hamanet affirmed that the base is not exclusively for Beijing, and in fact, 2 Japanese warships were the first foreign vessels to dock there. China has been involved in upgrading the Green Base since 2022. Meanwhile, Western concerns have been raised since 2019, when media outlets revealed a secret draft agreement allowing China to dock warships. In late 2023, Chinese warships docked there for the first time. In 2024, a U.S. warship docked at the commercial port of Sihanoukville, marking the first U.S. military visit to Cambodia in 8 years. Cambodia has long been a close ally of China in Southeast Asia. Under former Prime Minister Hun Sen, Beijing poured billions of dollars into infrastructure, while relations between Feng and Washington have deteriorated in recent years. Are Cuba's military drills a deterrent against the U.S. or a way to reassure itself? Ladies and gentlemen, Cuban President Miguel Diaz on Saturday defended his country's military readiness drills, viewing them as a deterrent against a potential U.S. attack. This month, U.S. President Donald Trump warned that Cuba was on the verge of collapse and demanded that Havana reach an agreement or face the same consequences as Venezuela. Venezuela, a key ally of Cuba and a crucial source of oil and finance that Trump has threatened to cut off, was present at military exercises on Saturday, which included a tank unit from the Cuban Armed Forces. He was accompanied by Cuban General Alvaro Lopez Miera, the Minister of the Armed Forces, and several other high-ranking military officers. The best way to prevent aggression is to force imperialism to calculate the price it will pay if it attacks our country, Diaz said on Cuban television. And that is closely related to our preparation, which is all the more important in the current circumstances. He added, "It is currently unclear what price Cuba, backward and weak, can make the United States, with the world's most powerful army, navy, and air force, pay for such exercises." The Cuban National Defense Council, headed by Diaz, recently met with the goal of improving and perfecting the level of readiness and cohesion within the country's leadership, according to an official government statement. The statement said the council met to analyze and approve plans and measures to transition to a state of war, but provided no further details. These military exercises are part of the country's preparations under its People's War Strategy, a term the government uses to refer to the mobilization of civilians in the event of armed conflict. The suppression of protests in Iran is a state-sponsored crime. The New York Times reported on Sunday, May 25, citing two officials close to the matter, that Supreme Leader Azat Ali Khamenei ordered Iran's Supreme National Security Council to suppress the protests on May 9 by any means necessary. According to the officials, security forces were then deployed to the streets with orders to shoot and kill protesters without mercy. The Times quoted Raha Barini, a lawyer and Iran researcher at Amnesty International, as saying that this was not simply a violent crackdown on protests, but a state-orchestrated massacre. Although the internet shutdown is currently obscuring the full extent of the violence, the Times has verified footage from early January showing security forces firing on protesters in at least 19 Iranian cities and 6 neighborhoods in Tehran. Approximately 20 Iranians who participated in protests in various cities, as well as family members of those killed, were interviewed by Tomes on condition of anonymity for fear of retaliation. They were shot in the back and brutally beaten in the streets. Footage verified by the Thez corroborated these accounts, showing what appeared to be security forces firing on protesters from the roof of a police station in Tehran Pras. Meanwhile, shouts of "Die for Cain" echoed in the background. A doctor at Sohada Taris Hospital said that from September 9th to 10th, the hospital received about 70 protesters injured by gunfire every hour. "What I witnessed will haunt me forever," a doctor in Isfahan told Tomes in a text message. "I feel guilty that I'm still alive." According to the Times, Tehran's chief morgue, the Carrick Forensic Center, was quickly overwhelmed by the number of bodies. According to sources, families were led into a hall where television screens displayed images of the deceased. Each person was numbered and asked to speak up if they recognized anyone. According to the Times, a video showed nearly 300 bodies, reportedly of young people, lying on a sidewalk outside a morgue. The person filming the video said these were people whom others love deeply. Estimates of the total death toll from the protests vary. Iran International estimated on Sunday that at least 36,500 Iranians have been killed by the regime since the protests began. This estimate was based on new documents and witness accounts from medical workers, families, and others. The Mail cited Professor Amir Mobasis Barasta, who suggested the death toll could be between 33,000 and 97,000. As of Saturday, an Iranian human rights group based in the U.S. has confirmed 5,459 deaths. They are also investigating over 17,000 other potential deaths, but the actual number of people killed is still unknown. 645 people were reported injured. Both Iranian International and Parasta reported that the authorities allegedly began carrying out executions across the country. According to images released from local morgues and reviewed by Iranian International, some of the dead were reportedly shot in the head after being taken to hospitals for medical treatment. A group of medical personnel confirmed to Iran International that fatal shots were fired at the injured According to Israeli officials, the night of August 8th on the streets of Iran was the bloodiest night in the history of the Islamic Republic and among the bloodiest nights in the world in a generation. As Anton News correspondent Am posted on Twitter Sunday morning, he wrote that the regime has murdered thousands, possibly tens of thousands of people. A massacre on an almost unimaginable scale. Meanwhile, according to Iran International reporting on Saturday afternoon, Iran's supreme leader, Azat Ari Khamenei, moved to a fortified underground bunker with numerous tunnels in Tehran after senior security and military officials warned of the increased possibility of a U.S. attack. According to the Iranian opposition news agency Moscam, the supreme leader's third son has taken over his father's day-to-day duties, serving as the main channel of communication with the executive branches of the government. The U.S. may impose a blockade on Iran instead of launching a military attack. Leading Iran expert and senior fellow at the INSS National Security Institute, Danny Shinovek, said in an interview on 103 FM on Sunday that a U.S. attack on Iran might not be a military strike, but rather a blockade. These comments came after U.S. President Donald Trump confirmed last week that the U.S. has many ships heading toward Iran, but he hoped the U.S. wouldn't have to use them. We have a fleet heading toward them. They know what we want, Trump said before leaving the World Economic Forum in Dros. Sinovic said the U.S. presence in the Gulf region allows for operational flexibility. This means that a military attack is not necessarily the only option. It could also involve imposing a blockade on Iran. He added that Israel must consider that all options are on the table. In a separate interview with 103 FM on Sunday, former Israeli National Security Advisor Dr. Halada also expressed a similar view, explaining that although the U.S. has recently increased its forces in the region, the current situation does not indicate an imminent large-scale war. This is likely due to pressure from the U.S., which will succeed in persuading Iranian leaders to agree to their terms and sit down at the negotiating table. Halada said that President Trump is not interested in a larger-scale attack on Iran. Both Shinovik and Halada believe that Iran's retaliation against Israel is not inevitable if the U.S. attacks the Israeli regime. Shinovik explained that if Iran believes the U.S. attack is merely symbolic, it might not target Israel in retaliation. However, if Iran believes the U.S. is attacking to overthrow its regime, it could target Israel to end the attack. Halada added that Iran would be making a mistake if it attacked Israel because Israel would retaliate strongly, targeting expensive infrastructure that is critically important to both the Iranian regime and its economy. However, he argued that Israel should not intervene unless there was no other option, as it was unlikely to destabilize the situation again through its own attack. He noted that there were differences between Israel and the United States, but Iran needed to anticipate that Israel would use its power in a less restrained manner. According to Halada, Iran wants to prolong the situation and would consider it a success if the U.S. withdrew its troops without attacking. Regarding Israel's preparations for a possible attack, Halada said that the Israeli people should trust the Rear Command despite all the talk. He said, "I believe the Rear Command and the security agencies will not take unnecessary risks. It's important to ensure everyone is within the scope of protection, and we are ready." The U.S. continues its wave of deportations of Russians. Radio Liberty quoted Damich Valuev, head of the Russian America for Democracies in Russia, as saying that this morning a deportation flight took off from Mesas, Arizona, carrying Russians whose asylum applications had been rejected in the United States. According to media reports, this is the 5th deportation flight since last year and the first of the new year 2026. Prior to this, deportations of Russians took place in June, August, and December of last year. The exact number of Russians on board is unclear, but as of Saturday, approximately 20 were being prepared for deportation. In addition, Iranian citizens and refugees from Arab countries were also deported on this flight. According to The Value, before the flight took off, some people with unprocessed asylum applications were removed from the plane. Some Russians were held in detention rooms before being deported. Russia suffered a severe gold drain, while China benefited from the situation. Ladies and gentlemen, cooperation between Russia and China has seen new advances in recent years as Moscow faces Western sanctions. The Russian state news agency REN Novosti, citing data from China's General Administration of Customs, reported that Russia has increased its gold exports to China ninefold in 2025 to 25.3 tons, equivalent to an 800% increase. In terms of gold value, the increase reached 14.6 times, up to $3.29 billion. According to Raw, both the value and volume of Russian gold exports to China are record highs in the history of bilateral gold trade. In December 2025 alone, Russian gold exports to China reached $1.35 billion, equivalent to 10 tons, also a record high. In terms of value, Russia ranked 7th among countries exporting gold to China last year. Switzerland was the top exporter, selling $25.73 billion worth of gold to China. In 2024, Russia is expected to rank 11th on the list of gold suppliers to China. Over the past year, the Russian central bank has shifted to directly selling gold from its reserves on the domestic market, opening access to the metal for banks, state-owned enterprises, and certain investment institutions. On October 20, Bloomberg reported that Russia appears to have reaped unexpected profits of up to $216 billion from the surge in gold prices. According to the news agency, the high gold prices have become a key factor in strengthening Russia's financial position amidst international sanctions. Russia and China have intensified cooperation since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The two countries described their relationship as an unlimited strategic partnership, with bilateral trade exceeding $200 billion for the third consecutive year. Moscow and Beijing have essentially eliminated the use of Western currencies in bilateral trade, with almost all payments now made in the group and the yuan. Fearing Beijing's terrorist threats, the Performing Arts Group exposed the Chinese Communist Party's evil repression. The Court Times reported that the New York-based Central Chinese classical dance group has become the target of increasing threats and sabotage attempts in recent months. These threats included death threats, bomb threats, and impersonation attacks. The perpetrators of these threats impersonated Taiwanese government officials, journalists, Chinese dissidents, or, in one case, a former performer of Sendin. Similar threats have also been tracked by Taiwanese authorities from China. Krui organizes highly acclaimed performances with the slogan "China before Communism" and has long been a target of the Chinese Communist Party regime in Beijing. Chinese embassies and consulates have repeatedly issued statements criticizing Sandrin and have in the past attempted to pressure theaters and government officials to stop the company's performances, threatening to damage relations with China. The most recent statements were made this month by the Chinese embassy in London and the Chinese consulates in Sydney and Melbourne, Australia. These statements were then amplified by media outlets controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. Shendrim was founded in 2006 by practitioners of Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, a spiritual practice and meditation based on the principles of truth, compassion, and forbearance. This religious group has been brutally persecuted by the Chinese Communist Party since 1999, with millions of practitioners arrested, tortured, forced into labor, and even killed for their organs to supply the regime's transplant industry. Shendrim performances often include one or two dance pieces depicting the repression. In the past 2 years, Shenin has been the target of more than 160 death threats and bomb threats, often sent via email to the theaters where the company performs. According to statistics from the FDIC Falun Dafa Information Center, a nonprofit organization that monitors the persecution, there have been over 70 similar threats targeting Falun Gong in general. According to the AP Times, an email dated August 8th, sent to Sendrin's ticketing service in Taiwan, falsely attributed to Taiwan's Minister of Interior, stated that if the shows were held, violence would occur, including the assassination of Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te and bombing of the presidential palace. In December and January, an individual or group impersonating an editor from the Ibot Times sent threatening emails to Sign's ticketing contacts in France, the UK, Canada, Taiwan, and the US, threatening bombings, assassinations of Canadian politicians, or an unspecified terrorist attack. Around the same time, numerous threats involving bombings, kidnappings, rape, and shootings were sent to Sandrine and its ticketing contacts in Taiwan, Poland, the UK, and Canada by someone posing as a dissident. Chinese aunts living in Canada sent a warning message: cancel Sandrine's performance or British Prime Minister Keir Starmer would be shot from a distance. Although neither threat materialized, they continuously pressured Shendrin, repeatedly forcing theater audiences to evacuate just hours before performances were scheduled to begin. Levy Brownie, executive director of the Falun Dafa Information Center in the United States, told AP Tim Harms, "Let's call these bomb threats and mass shootings what they are. These are threats to commit acts of terrorism. No theater, company, or community in America should have to endure such terrorist threats." The U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation has arrested several agents of the Chinese Communist Party targeting Falun Gong, including 2 men who pleaded guilty in 2024 to acting as agents for Beijing, conspiring to bribe an IRS official to open a fictitious investigation into Shenyun. Brody stated that the Chinese Communist Party's campaign targeting the overseas Falun Gong community, particularly Shendron within the United States, constitutes a national security threat. As a nation, we must find ways to prevent hostile foreign forces, such as the Chinese Communist Party, from negatively impacting our communities and undermining our businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, this military news update concludes here. Thank you for your time. Hello, and see you again in the next program.